Hey, this is Chris from your new favorite podcast, Conor's Basement. So this podcast is dedicated to the analysis of the music of Bright Eyes and Conor Oberst. So if that sounds interesting to you or you enjoy discussions about music in general, stick around for this episode. Maybe you'll find a newfound appreciation for the band. Today we're going to be looking into Every Day and Every Night, released in 1999 by Bright Eyes. This EP precedes Fevers and Mirrors, which would end up being the album that really put Bright Eyes on the map. Before we get into our discussions about the music, I want to thank our patrons Goldie and Mom, and want to remind everybody to check out our Instagram and Twitter at Conor's Basement. We'll be posting about new episodes and really want to encourage people to message us and get in on some discussion about the songs. It's a lot more fun when we get to hear other people's opinions. And also, we'd like you to consider listening to the album Every Day and Every Night before listening to this episode of the podcast. Refresh yourself or listen to it for the first time, take a look at the lyrics, and maybe that will spark some ideas for you as well. Well, that's it for the intro. Let's get into it. All right, welcome everybody to the podcast the New York Times is calling dank. Now, we haven't yet figured out if it's because of the content or just like the general environment of the basement, but we're excited nonetheless. This is Conor's Basement, the podcast dedicated to the music of Conor Oberst. My name is Chris, and joining me is the champ, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I would be considered.
But you're the champ, right?
I am Jesse. I'm the champ. I mean, thank you for alerting the public to the really beautiful write-up in the New York Times of our podcast. I really want to get those results back for whether there's black mold down here, because that could be a problem.
Yeah, I cut out the newspaper clipping, and it says like the new Joe Rogan question.
Whoever's editing this, keep that in. I'm going to reference it later so we can't cut it.
Oh, man. Oh, I'm sweating already.
I'm
sweating already, buddy. I guess this is all, a fun way to talk about the reception that we've gotten thus far. It's small, but it's huge. You know what I mean? Like, we've posted this to our own Instagrams and to Reddit, and we have close to 200 downloads on our first two episodes. We thought maybe 10 people would listen. I'm floored, man.
Yeah, if you subtract our parents from the equation, it's like tops 5 people that we wouldn't know in our personal lives would actually listen to this thing.
Right.
And we've gotten such interest and support, and it's just been kind of wild, right? Like I didn't expect it to get such good reception, and we really appreciate it. To everybody who is listening, thank you for showing up.
And actually, speaking of the reception, we actually got like a couple of comments. People had their own observations about what we were discussing in the podcast. And one of them that we wanted to highlight was from Your Brother's Tears on Reddit, which a fantastic reference, of course. Gotta love the fact that people are willing to honor Bright Eyes in their usernames. Just a salute to that. But maybe within that comment, what were some of the things that we wanted to kind of discuss?
Yeah, so we didn't want to go too crazy with this. We might want to save this for like a separate video or something. But there were a couple of things that we wanted to point out that Your Brother's Tears had asked us or wanted us to maybe touch more on.
So one of the questions, or one of the comments is, how can we reconcile from persona non grata, that question? And it does have a way of being interpreted in two different ways, I think, because whenever I listen to it, sometimes I hear it one way, sometimes I hear it another, where one of them is an earnest, how can we reconcile? What can I do to fix this? And then the other is kind of the opposite. Will we ever be able to, right? That loss of hope. How could we ever reconcile after all of that?
Yeah, and I think that ambiguity that is being referenced here is one of those, that's what makes the songwriting so strong. And the fact that even though this question was being asked while it was just the EP, and now in the far future of the good times where we have the Bright Eyes album, we get to see that being like the back and forth there. In a lot of Conor's lyrics, there's this idea of being forgiven or being absolved of some sin. So I don't think that this flip-flopping is really like that out of the realm. Because sometimes it's like, I want to be forgiven. And then other times there's that guilt and written like, oh, I don't even deserve to be forgiven.
Right.
I think it's really interesting that your brother's tears pointed that out, that tug and pull.
Yeah, I want to thank your brother's tears for like the really thoughtful comment. Like I said, we have quite a lot to talk about for every day and every night. Deceptively small, but a lot of heavy topics that we're going to cover. But definitely something I think to put a pin in, because we want to figure out what's the best way to integrate stuff with what are going to be relatively long podcasts, maybe turning those into like separate little small things to pop up on YouTube or our social media at Conor's Basement and stuff like that. Just so everybody knows, we do want to talk about Down in the Weeds, but we're going to wait. We want to let the album percolate, let our thoughts kind of form, because I've noticed that going back to an album multiple times with a greater period of time between, you kind of get a different appreciation or you notice different things.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think that a lot of our analysis comes from our ability to like, for Letting Off the Happiness, that was an album that has been like playing for years and years and years for both of us. And so we, I think talking about it, we definitely got new ideas and saw different perspectives. But I think a lot of those ideas were sitting in our heads for a while and just didn't have a place to go. Whereas we're still figuring out our ideas about this album, right?
Yeah. Just spoiler alert, we did talk a lot already. Like, but we took half an hour before we actually started recording this episode just talking about the new album.
Yeah, we definitely we procrastinated a little bit, just geeking out and fan theorying.
Yeah, we have quite a bit to get to. A deceptively small record, but it's so important because it bridges Letting Off the Happiness into, which is no secret, our favorite album, Fevers and Mirrors. There's quite a bit in this small little 5-track EP, and you can definitely hear the change in the songs that Conor was writing along with Mike, how Letting Off the Happiness turned into Fevers and Mirrors. You listen to this EP, you really get the sense of where they were going with it and the evolution of their sound.
Yes, absolutely. I think evolution is a really lovely term here, because while Letting Off the Happiness has its own unique sound, this is the first album where it feels like there's a very purposeful playing of genre going on. Like there is a real drastic change in style that happens here that is so very different from most of what we hear in Letting Off the Happiness, that it kind of sets us up for what the band will do in the future, which is, I don't know, what other band do you know of that does something so different with each different album, right?
Yeah, I find it so hard to describe Bright Eyes to people. And of course, I want to talk about my favorite band. This is how we got here to the podcast. But I try to show someone, and really what they want to hear is like, oh, so this is emo music. But that sounds so disingenuous. And don't get me wrong, emo music as a genre is probably like my favorite type. But there's a negative connotation that goes around with it, that it's like, oh, it's just like angsty teenager music. And okay, maybe that's true for some bands, but to label Bright Eyes as just emo and slap it with that connotation just feels wrong, you know?
Yeah, and I also think sonically too, it doesn't quite match up, right? Because I don't know, there are quite a few bands who I will not name for risk of like offending anybody, but it kind of sounds like a lot of the music is just kind of the same. It's the same album, maybe a few things different here and there, but it's expected. It's routine. Right. And it's like, if you listen to Fevers and Mirrors, you would not have any kind of clue that this band is capable of making something like Casadega. Or,
right.
Going even more like as far as like Digital Ash and a Digital Urn. And like, okay, so we're going to switch over to more synthy kind of stuff.
which came out at the same time as I'm Wide Awake It's Morning, and it couldn't sound any more different.
Oh, and that's the perfect example. That happened at the same time, and they were doing completely different things and tackling completely different subject matters. So I think that this album, if Letting Off the Happiness is the air quotes emo album, which I would still be very hesitant to call it that, right? This is sort of showing how they are able to take that idea and then put some different, weird, interesting spin on it to make it unique. And it's a space that they don't even live in too long.
Yeah. Because it is literally just a passing note into Fevers and Mirrors, which would be coming out a year after. But a quick note before we get into our thoughts about the themes of the album, kind of wanted to give a little bit of a content warning. For people that are familiar with Conor's work, this comes as no surprise, but maybe people who have stumbled upon the podcast, welcome. You're in for a fun ride. This is some awesome music. But he does deal with some very heavy themes, for lack of a better word. I'll just say sad. Specifically on this EP, we'll be talking a little bit about depression, addiction, suicide in some of the songs too. So really only listen if you are in a headspace that you feel comfortable listening to some of those topics. And if not, maybe hit pause, come back to it another time when you're ready for it. We'd love to have you. I think you're going to enjoy his music as much as we do.
Yeah, so make sure you take care of yourself, folks. And without further ado, let's jump into the album.
So as we begin to talk about the themes, one thing I want to bring up is the album insert that comes with the vinyl, maybe the CD too. I'm not entirely sure because, a little too cool for those. Kind of a bit of a record collector. A
bit of a record buff here.
It's no big deal, but big man's in town is what So the album insert has old photos of Conor and his friends. There are these like really haunting pictures of stone statues, which I'm sure like in context aren't freaky, but in black and white and surrounded by these old photos, they're really just kind of scary. And then like various questions. And I'll highlight a couple of them. It would take too long to read all of them. One of them, was it hard to get out of bed today? What happens to us when we die? Do you ever look at yourself in the mirror? And one really special question that we'll get to talk about in the next podcast. Where are you, Arionette? That's right. On this album insert, Conor is already posing that question to us. Or to whomever. I don't know. I think those questions do speak to a lot of the themes. I don't know which ones that you specifically pulled out that you're thinking of for the EP.
So, I think what's really interesting here is I know that the reference to Neely O'Hara is really interesting because it shows us that Conor doesn't exactly shy away from referencing literature. And that was pretty apparent in the previous album that we had covered.
Right.
But I find and I might get some groans from our audience because this is one of those kind of books that's super divisive, and I might mention this and have to take cover as you throw stones at me. I'm getting a very Catcher in the Rye vibe from this album.
Okay.
From this EP. And
I got to channel my 10th grade English class.
Right. There is a line from a line allows progress, a circle does not, that made that connection. And I feel like, and we'll dive more into this as we get into Fevers and Mirrors as well, that there is a very strong connection between the character of Holden Caulfield and the speaker of these songs.
Which we'll refer to as Conor just for simplicity's sake going forward. Yeah.
And so that we can feel like he's our best friend and he'll be on the podcast soon.
Right, of course.
Exactly. He's on the cover. He's gotta come on the podcast.
Otherwise, what, we're liars? Absolutely not.
No, of course not. Conor Oberst, if you're not a Patreon subscriber yet, why don't you become a patron? Because you totally listen to this. Yeah, so I think the main connection that I made here that might be a direct reference is in Line Allows Progress, Circle Does Not. There is the lines, as you try to find some source of light, try to name one thing you like. You used to have such a longer list, and light you never had to look for it. Funny enough, there is a section in The Catcher in the Rye in which Holden Caulfield, the protagonist, who has his vices of smoking and drinking, talks to his little sister Phoebe. So this is Phoebe talking. You don't like anything that's happening. It made me feel even more depressed when she said it. When she said that. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Sure, I do. Don't say that. Why the hell do you say that? Because you don't. You don't like any schools. You don't like a million things. You don't. Because you, and skipping here a little bit, because you don't, she said, name one thing. And then he struggles to name one thing he likes.
Right.
So that to me was kind of like, to me was a smoking gun.
Right.
And if anybody who's listening is familiar with the plot, love him or hate him, Holden Caulfield has a lot of similarities to the character in this album because destructive drinking and addictive personality kind of stuff, you know?
Right. I mean, kind of a blend too, I guess, with like the theme overall in the album that we're looking at, and then A Line Allows Progress. So I'll respond in the same. I think for me, a lot of the themes that I ended up pulling out were those of existential questions, which I think are not unheard of, actually pretty typical for someone of Conor's age at the time. And I'm not saying it's a specifically teenage thing, but that's when you start to pose questions to the greater universe and why am I here? What happens to us when we die, as is posed on that album insert. So for A Line Allows Progress, some of that stuff does come through, but I think this is probably more personal than existential for Conor on this track, the way that I read it. So the title is pretty literal, right? A line allows progress, a circle does not.
Right, yeah.
So, but I see like there's these self-destructive actions, and there's the cycle of addiction, hope that the cycle will be broken, and then this depression when you wake up the next day and realize that nothing has changed. We tend to do this, that we put a lot of pressure, like we have that epiphany and like, okay, tomorrow, that's it. Everything's going to be different. Everything's going to change. He gives himself that pep talk that everything is going to be better. But then you get disheartened whenever you realize that, wait, it's tomorrow and I still feel like crap and I still run to my same vices. And it's a lot of, like I said, it's a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves and put on these moments. And it's not fair for us to do that. Yet it's kind of in our nature, I guess, to do that.
And there's also the dangerous theme that I'm seeing that takes place in a lot of cases of addiction, which is learned helplessness. Mm-hmm. Right? Like you can have those moments where like, I'm going to change. It's going to be different tomorrow. You wake up, nothing has changed. And then instead of having the attitude of maybe trying harder or reaching out to people who can help you, it's more like, I guess it's pointless. I guess I can't do this. I guess I'm not cut out for this, XYZ. And then the cycle perpetuates.
Yeah.
And you get really interesting lines, break the circle of thoughts you chase before they catch back up with you. And your parents noticed your thinning face, all the weight you lost, all the weight you were losing. That's kind of the last time that we hear about parents, right? It seems like as much problems as he has, it feels like a lot of this is being left to happen. And maybe. How do you break out of the circle?
Maybe. That's all I'll say. I may have something down the line, but sorry, keep going.
I'm curious.
Keep going.
No, that's really all I wanted to say. And that that is something that is going to be seen definitely throughout Fevers and Mirrors of like the hopelessness versus hope and fighting your vices versus giving in. Mm-hmm. And so as we go through the this EP, we're going to see that these themes also repeat here. And it's very much a herald for the album that's coming.
Yeah, in this song, I really do enjoy this song. I like the slow build of it. You just have Conor and the organ, then the drums come in, then the rest of it until it swells into that large finish. And actually, I'm pretty sure your boy Tim Kasher is the one
I was
doing
just
the
about
other.
to say this.
Yeah, he's the only other person credited for vocals on the album insert. But you would probably recognize his voice better than I would.
See, and that's the thing. Like, I was about to ask you about that because I do love Tim Kasher. I love his work. It doesn't quite sound like him, and I don't know whether it's just because like maybe he's much younger and it's harder for me to recognize that. But something sounds a little off there. But yeah, you're right. I do remember reading like he was the only other credited vocal, and I think he's credited with something funny like ghostly vocals or something.
Yeah.
So, and I love Tim Kasher's stuff. So it was fun trying to like listen for him, even though it sounds a little off to me, but I don't know, maybe I just don't have the ear to find it.
But absolutely a great song. Like I said, that pep talk that he tries to give himself, done feeling like a skeleton, no more sleepwalking dead. And, so maybe a line isn't what we need. Maybe we just kind of need to bend that circle like a paperclip and bend it outwards until it's something line-esque. Because like when you put pressure on yourself to go from a circle to a line, as Conor reflects on in the song, you just end up disappointed. So maybe we just kind of need to bend it and be content with the fact that progress is slow. As much as that sucks, progress is slow. Yeah.
It's like making major changes is, and that word progress, right? And I think that there's this very youthful idea of what progress is, as far as like, yep, I have to change. Something's got to change. It's going to be this like big flashy thing where I'm a different person now. And as adults, we know that that's not how people change. It's a lot of flip-flopping and back and forth and wishy-washiness before we actually start making progress. And I guess as a young person who doesn't have a frame of reference for patience, that could be apocalyptic in a sense.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's very hard to kind of frame when life feels like just a blip and a blur. It's really hard to center yourself in the idea of the long game. Again, progress is slow, but I guess speaking of progress, would you like to progress our way over to the next track?
Golf clap.
Thank you.
Excellently done.
Well, Jesse, this is it. This is probably the biggest song that we have talked about to date. So if we don't do it justice, we will be booed out of town and our podcast will be stripped from all podcasting platforms. So no pressure, buddy.
I hate this song so much.
Okay, guys, that was a mistake. Please, he's out. We'll get rid of him.
We're gonna take him around the back and put him out of his misery.
Well, I'll talk to him. Don't worry.
Well, yes, you're totally right in that. This is one of those songs where a surprising amount of people that I'll casually be talking about Bright Eyes with will know this one. Like, whereas I have to kind of struggle to find a different example of a song that they might know other than First Day of My Life, this one strangely seems to have gotten like a lot of attention, and not strangely as though it's like a bad song or anything, like quite aside from the joke that I just made, but it's just like, this seems like an interest. Like, why do so many people know about this song? It's good.
Yeah.
It just doesn't fit them. Like, First Day of My Life is just like chef kiss, like soppy
Mainstream
love song,
music.
mainstream, and even like too good for mainstream. Like, mainstream should be on bended knees thanking Bright Eyes for that song. But
Right.
This one is just like gut wrenching in many ways.
I think the context of when it came out and the popularity of this genre kind of starting to peak. Like this was a song that managed to hit MySpace, basically. You know what I mean? Like I don't know if
that place existed at one point.
Yeah, like I don't know if that's like factually correct. Like that's why it blew up. But this was the type of song that would have made its rounds during all of our emo teen years, basically. And, I think that speaks to its popularity. I mean, the other reason could be that this was part of my open mic repertoire back in the day, and I probably had something to do with its popularity.
Well, listen, I think that we need to send Conor a very strongly worded email asking for your royalty checks for all the good work that you've done for his brand.
Or Conor, consider $5 Patreon tier good enough for me, buddy. You and me, buddy, huh?
We should make like a $3,000 tier and call it like actually Conor Oberst.
Actually Conor Oberst.
like we won't accept this tier unless you're literally actually Conor Oberst donated to the Patreon.
You got to do the Reddit thing where you write your username on a piece of paper and with the date and hold it up as you take a selfie. Yep. Oh man. But so this song, we could probably have an entire podcast talking about this song. I'm not even kidding. I could probably talk about it for an hour. So in the interest of time, I've pulled out some highlights and the main theme, or like the main story that I think is going on in the song. So I guess I'll kick it off with some of those highlights if that works for you.
Yeah, please go for it.
Yeah, so first off, I have to shout out the use of Fevers and Mirrors.
Yes.
He says, everything you've ever seen was just a mirror, spent your whole life sweating in an endless fever. So clearly has already begun drawing inspiration. I mean, we already talked about Where Are You, Arionette? So very clearly an EP preceding Fevers and Mirrors. And I also really love the imagery that he's conjuring in this song. When I listen to it, I don't have synesthesia, but I swear he forces me into it, because when he gets to those choruses and he talks about throwing the lovers to drown in their innocence in the water, I see blue, or to burn in their arrogance, I see the red of the fire, or in our resolution where they're laying entwined on a bed of clover, like I see the green. And I think that's just so amazing that he was able to write something so powerful that you can literally visualize it in your mind's eye, or whatever you want to call it.
The imagery of the song is very, very strong. And I think that the way in which it's conveyed to the listener is probably the majority of the reason why, even as I questioned why the song kind of took off the way that it did, the fact that it is this beautiful language being screamed by a teenager is kind of perfect. And You're right. There's something so descriptive where you can really be put into this mindset. And we get that the imagery again, the motif of green happening here. It's a holdover from Letting Off the Happiness. And I think this is sort of the first, in addition to you saying that we have the actual reference of the title of the soon to be album, Fevers and Mirrors, we are seeing where the shift is happening from Letting Off the Happiness to Fevers and Mirrors, right?
Yeah.
Because it's and now you're laying in a bathtub full of freezing water wishing you were a ghost. I don't know why that always stuck with me of I don't know, just that idea of we put our warning of mental health, so we're gonna get into the sad part, but I can imagine somebody being too sad to leave a bathtub and letting the water get really cold, and also just the holdover of that green from Letting Off the Happiness here, but now in a totally different light. I think this EP does a good job of sort of transitioning listeners from what they had heard before into what they're about to get.
Yeah, Bright Eyes, they didn't squander the opportunity either, because Fevers and Mirrors, I think, really is the album that put them on the map. And the fact that this was the EP in transition, it means a lot that they could shift their sound so quickly too, and get that blend. And other lines too, I want to just kind of shout out on this. There are so many quotables, right? First, you know that she's gone because she left you a song that you don't want to sing. And part of what makes that so powerful is just how Conor sings it, of course. It's the end of that verse leading into the chorus, and he gets that perfect shrieky vibrato that you just love to hear.
Yep.
But he speaks to that kind of phenomenon when you're with someone, you might have a song with them that's your song. And once you break up or once the relationship is over, you no longer want to sing it. You can no longer listen to it without the context of everything that you lost. And then the other line I wanted to bring up ended up becoming something other than what I had planned to be, which we'll
Yeah.
speak to. I'll speak to on Neely O'Hara when we get there. And then his scream at the end when he just gets in there and he's just, all right. Oh my God, dude. Oh, it's just perfect. And again, I think this is why this song made the rounds, is just that perfect teenage melodrama. But it's so punchy and it's fast and it makes you feel the feels.
And it makes you feel the feels, and I've definitely said it at some point earlier in the podcast, but like the ending is on a high note.
Mm-hmm.
As much as this is like an angsty, angry, depressed, all of those things bundled up into one song, we end with an understanding of like why he felt this way in the first place. Like, I'm only angry and depressed and this and that about this relationship falling through, or whatever it is that happened that had that falling out, right? Because something like that last verse can exist.
Yeah, it's just Conor coming to terms with the fact that he's angry, he's pissed off right now, but at the end of it, there's a little bit of hope that you have to hold on to, that you have to try to believe that next time things will be different, or that you don't necessarily curse the idea of love in its entirety. But overall, I would say, like I mentioned the theme of existentialism earlier when we were talking about themes, but I actually read part of the song as an existential crisis, because Connor's understanding of the world is being ripped apart. He says he read all of the pages and there's still no answer. Or I stand in the sun, breathe with my lungs, trying to spare me the weight of the truth. So he's coming to terms with his maybe naive idea that you get to spend your eternity with this one perfect true love. But as we know, that's not always the case. And what's left are these feelings and experiences that turn into fleeting moments and memories. That's all that's left behind. So he tries to distill those emotions, those feelings that he had, down and convey them into a perfect sonnet or one foolish line. But I think he's contending with the fact that he can't do it. He can't properly convey what that experience was like, because words can only get you so far.
And
But
ironically, he ended up, I think, doing that in
right,
the course of the song.
you stole my friggin' words, man.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, man.
No, it's that I think that's amazing that you saw the same thing. Like, he did it so well. 2 decades later, people are still brought to tears by this song.
I 100% agree, and I think that Conor is kind of one of those artists who there is. I'm gonna botch the quote, but somebody once said, like, you can move past something, but it's more noble to work through it.
Hmm.
And I think in the process of working through to work through the idea that these fairy tales that drugged us aren't what life is like. And you can flip through those pages all you want, and it's not necessarily going to be how it turns out in the real world. The act of working through that made art. I do think that there is a dangerous connotation of like the suffering artist, as though like there is virtue in somebody being like depressed or angry or something for the sake of art. And
Yeah.
I think people take away the wrong lesson. It's not, you don't make art because you're depressed. I think you make art when you work with that in a productive or cathartic way. that you don't necessarily need those feelings, but as this song is showing, if you approach it with bravery and honesty, I think that's where this sort of art comes from. And in the end, despite not actually writing a sonnet, he kind of did write the perfect sonnet.
I think that's really beautifully said. I don't know. I've said my piece on the track personally. I mean, look, like I said, there's so much more I could talk about, but those are I guess, the highlights I wanted to pull out.
What do you say we jump into the next song, eh?
Sounds good.
And the next song up on the EP is On My Way to Work. And I find this song, I actually really like this one. I know that I think we have differing opinions on this one. Would you like to maybe start us off? Because I think I might have a little more to say about this one than you do.
Sure, yeah. Like you said, we have differing opinions. I don't dislike it. Usually if I listen to this EP, I'll listen all the way through, but it's definitely not my favorite song on it. I'd unfortunately have to rank it 5th out of the 5 tracks, but that's just by virtue that something has to come in last place, But I think this song is attempting to understand the greater questions of human existence. Kind of that question, again, in the beginning of the album insert of what will happen to us when we die. I think he speaks in the first verse about religion, and he's kind of posing this idea that people who believe in God have something to believe in, which is giving them the sense of purpose, that they don't have to fear what comes next. They don't have to fear death because there's something, they believe that something is waiting for them on the other side. And I think although he is critical of religion, that he grew up going to Catholic school and it didn't gel with him, he didn't find religion fit for him. I think he's a little jealous of that fact because even though he has those negative attitudes, at least they have that faith. At least they believe that death is not the end, whereas death terrifies him.
One reason why I think the song is really interesting is that it is maybe like the most heart on the sleeve song, even compared to A Perfect Sonnet. In that, whereas A Perfect Sonnet is, even in its loudness and angst, it's a very refined and very thoughtful song.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this song kind of takes that idea of being jealous of the idea of things like of religion and not belonging to that community, and then runs kind of wild with that. And especially because there's this build up to the idea of, hey, I wonder how this guy died, right? Like, was it peaceful or was it really, really violent? And then there's this sort of like pulling back and self-aware of, well, maybe it's me who's this unstable. And it's kind of fun just to see like, okay, let's let this off the leash for a little while, but then by the end, let's pull it back. And that's what I ultimately find fascinating about it, because it does almost get a little childish. Like, or was he sweating in a struggle to keep breathing, ripping apart the sheets that dressed his bed, crying out loud for someone to help him, and collapsing on his back, all pale and dead? Like, the use of the word all it just comes across to me as a little childish, right? All pale and dead. Like, it kind of reads like how a kid would talk about it. And then he like fell down. He was all like gross and stuff. Like that's kind of how it feels to me.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it's in part intentional. Like, it's meant to, like, he's really giving into these angsty feelings, but then pulls it back and is being more reflective rather. And like, maybe it's me. Maybe there's something like I'm doing wrong, which is a dangerous thing to think, because I think often people like to blame themselves for their problems or their thought space, which isn't, it's as unhelpful as blaming the world, right? And I think that's how he starts. He starts by blaming the world, and he ends with blaming himself.
And not only that, I mean, these are really hard questions that people are trying to figure out that have much more experience than he does at this point as well, These are typical questions, again, that someone would be asking in their late teens. He's trying to understand the end of life and what's the point in doing anything if life is brief, if it's forgettable, if it's finite? And really, it's a balancing act, right? Because you could go one way and say, well, nothing matters, so I'm going to do all the most self destructive things, live a completely hedonistic lifestyle, screw everybody. Or you could go the opposite way and be so paralyzed by that and say, what's the point? I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to lay in bed all day because there's nothing waiting for me at the end. So it's a balancing act, and Connor's trying to figure out where he fits on that spectrum and how he can best kind of integrate that fear of not knowing and lead a relatively normal life.
And I'm not sure whether I have mentioned this already, but I do find that I like the song a lot too because it's an interesting bridge between letting off the happiness and what will be Fevers and Mirrors. Because, I mean, you can kind of see this song as like a grim reflection of The City Has Sex from letting off the happiness, because a lot of the same questions are put in both. But while The City Has Sex kind of is a fun song, and even if it gets like it asks those existential questions by the end, it's so raucous and wild that it's like you can almost be distracted by the fact that distracted away from those questions. This draws the attention, and there is that bit of like fun boppy song itness to the end of it, but I would definitely call this like a dark reflection of letting off the happiness, and kind of like one of the few tracks that has that bridge between these two albums. I mean, unless anybody else has something to say, should we head on over to the next one?
Yeah, that works for me. Let's do it. So, a new arrangement. We have reached our second to last song on the EP. One that I think fits very nicely leading into Neely O'Hara, and not in terms of it being kind of like a forgettable song. I actually think this is a bit of a sleeper on the album. Like one that when I first went through it, wasn't like, oh, I want to listen to that again. But as I kind of delved into this EP more and more over the past couple of years, turned out to be one that I actually quite like.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely see it as more of a sleeper because it's not. It's often one that when re-listening to this EP for this recording, it was one of those where it's like, oh, this was a song on this EP. I forgot about this, and it does a really effective job of. I think this might be one of the deeper explorations of the EP, interestingly enough.
Okay.
I don't know if you felt that same way. Like there's something a lot more abstract about this song than maybe the others.
Yeah, I had a hard time putting to words what I think Connor is getting at. And whenever I finally found that combination, I was like, "Oh, this is brilliant." So why keep you on the cliffhanger? That's what we're here for. I'll tell you what that is. Um, so
you'll get
honestly,
the full story if you pledge $5 a month over at patreon.com.
Or you get the full story by just waiting another like 15 seconds or so. Just be honest. Yeah. So, I do think that it speaks to this fear that Conor has that came through in letting off the happiness. And again, on this EP, that fear that you can never go back, right? That the past is the past, and this sort of like grief that you can never go back there. And it foreshadows a bit Connor's use of clocks and calendars as symbols in Fevers and Mirrors. Because literally in the beginning, if you could change the days, arranging them in some sweet new sequence. So he's talking about literally chopping up and moving the days of the week, days in the calendar, to potentially break up this monotony that he's in. And it's the lines that come after that. It's the moment you are living in, not the one that follows, that makes the mess that you're cleaning in your head. So perhaps that belief from A Line Allows Progress comes back, that tomorrow could be the day that it's fixed. But The problem is tomorrow is always changing, right? The goalpost is always changing because as soon as you get there, it's the present. So unfortunately for Conor, if the moment you are living in is the one that makes the mess that you're cleaning in your head, he's never going to get to that day that he's no longer making that mess.
Yeah, that's a really interesting analysis of what he's saying, because I think that's like I forget. I don't know if there's a particular philosopher that said this, or this is just one of those philosophical musings that's kind of just always there. But it's like the fact that there is no future. There's always now in the past, and now is becoming the past. So there's almost not now.
Wait, hold on. I was just listening to One Jug of Wine, and in the beginning of one of the songs, someone is speaking, and he says, "There is no future.
Oh,
there's
yeah.
only the past." Or something like that. I don't know the specific.
I think the line was, "There is no future, only the past happening over and over again."
Yes. Okay. Sorry, I kind of took us off there. Get us back on the rails.
No, but it goes to show, like, this is one of those ideas that comes up over and over again. And I think there is this nice, I don't know, this fantasy of being able to arrange things like a story in a way that makes sense. And life doesn't usually make sense. It's usually a mess. And if you're, if you don't know how to arrange it in such a way, you might start to fantasize about arranging it in a way that's almost supernatural, right? Of arranging it in a way that's interestingly not a line. And I don't know what you would call it. Would you call that a circle? If you could rearrange it in a certain way?
Is it a bent paperclip?
Yeah, is it a bent paperclip? I don't know.
Is it a Jeremy Bearimy? Shout out to my Good Place fans.
Oh, it's a show I have to watch. It is interesting how we start the EP with a line allows progress, a circle does not, as though a straight line is the best thing that you could hope for. And then we're almost done with the EP, and now all of a sudden it's like, nah, line isn't even good enough. We have to chop this up and arrange it in a way that's better.
Just like we do with the podcast.
It's just like, oh, if you folks only knew. If you folks only knew how much editing we have to do because Jesse and Chris can't keep their shit together.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Oh, it's bad. So the other thing I want to bring out about this is I wonder who Baby is, right? So Baby, when I call for you, I want you to come and explain yourself to everyone. And the other line is, and lay it out for everyone. So I've got a couple of ideas. I don't know if any of them are correct. Maybe the person saying baby is a parent, right? And I said that earlier, right? You had mentioned that's the only time parents are mentioned. I'm like, oh, maybe not. So my first thought was maybe it's a parent, an authority figure of some kind saying like, behave well. Don't embarrass us in front of the company with your sad boy act today. It's an important day. Something like that. Maybe it's Conor personifying his depression, like asking it to come out in the music he's writing, because without it, inspiration just kind of seems reluctant to happen. Or maybe it's tomorrow, kind of like what I was saying with the song, asking for it to come back. Because he says, lay it out for everyone exactly how it was before any of this happened. Maybe he's wishing that this imagined tomorrow could be the same as the happy days he used to have before whatever happened in his life to make him feel this way.
And maybe I'm too much in the headspace of the newest album and what's going on there. But I'm also starting to read the use of baby as almost aggressive too. Like you can really read this very passive aggressive. Like imagine like you got into a tiff with a partner and they want to be like scathing about it. I told you to come and lay it out. Don't feel awkward. Lay it out for everyone. Right? Like that kind of thing. Like maybe this is scathing. Maybe this is like, you wish it was a certain way, but maybe it's your fault. So yeah, indulge us. Tell us how you would lay it out. Because, you had no hand in, X, Y, and Z in that. So I don't know, maybe I'm just reading too much because of the everything going on in the new album. But maybe again, this ambiguity is what makes it so interesting, in that like there are so many different ways to arrange this in an interesting fashion.
Yeah, it's hell, it's what makes this possible as a podcast, right? Like if it was very cut and dry, like yes, baby is referring to, like, it would not be as fun. The fun part is thinking of all the crazy things that it could be, and then being completely wrong because he's talking to a literal baby. Like I said, this song I think is placed really well, and it gives us at the end, it leads into Neely O'Hara. Now, I'm ready to move on for various reasons, but before we do that, I need to know, Jesse, are you ready to come along with me, or do you still have something else to say?
I think I am ready to dive into the next song.
Well, put your little hand in mine and let's go. So this song flew under my radar for a really long time. I think it was whenever I bought the vinyl a couple of years ago, I started listening to it, and it has become my like 3 a.m. and why are you still awake song. So as you pointed out earlier, it references Valley of the Dolls and the character Neely O'Hara, who is addicted to sleeping pills or becomes addicted to sleeping pills, which end up effectively ruining her career as an actress. You know, I think you could take that very literally, and I think the lyrics speak to that very literally as well. But there's also a whole lot more to it.
Yeah, I think that there is a really interesting play here of between letting off the happiness and what we've seen here so far in Every Day and Every Night. The idea that your addiction covers you, that it blurs the edges, right? To then reference an addiction to sleep. Because I mean, if you're addicted to sleeping pills, right? I don't think it's necessarily for the what are you getting? Unless I'm like really showing my ignorance here. I think the point of it is to have that oblivion, and like
Right.
you know, especially you and I have sleep problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
it's not too hard to say like, yeah, when you lack sleep, that's, you know, sleep is a lovely, wonderful thing, and without it, and to take a character who craves and cannot get enough of just not being awake is quite interesting when you compare it to the rest of the EP that talks about like other substance abuses, right?
Yeah. In that sense, you know, really the meaning isn't hidden. And I think it's fair assessment to say like maybe Conor is reflecting on a future that may happen or maybe is already happening, where his self-medication is literally turning him into a person unrecognizable to himself. So I think that helps to tie it back to a perfect sonnet. That line ended up becoming something other than what I had planned to be. I think it speaks back to that. And I do want to make note too, like it's not only self-medication. And you know, this is a personal note, but as I and I'm sure many other people have been on varying prescription medications at different points in their life, I mean, I always got this really sad thought of how much of my general affect was me and how much of it was this manufactured version of me, this cheap version of me that the pills helped create, you know? So it's not a wild jump to think that these are thoughts coming through, that these behaviors ultimately end up changing who Conor is.
And I think that questioning of how much of yourself is like air quotes manufactured by the medication that you take. The two lines that repeat, do you think that someone paints your mirror? And
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that is in, because I have not read Valley of the Dolls, and so I'm not sure if that's a reference to something that happens in that novel. But I do find it fascinating that Like, you're coupling the idea of this addiction with, editing the one consistent thing that people use to see themselves, right?
Mm.
Like, apart from maybe phones these days, there is something truly unique about a mirror in that it's the only way that you see yourself. And painting it seems like, how are you perverting this in a good or bad way? And I do
Right.
like that juxtaposition of like marring a mirror and having an addiction of some sort.
It's in the song both literally and figuratively too. His subtle questioning and the last lines of the song are so haunting. You
Mm.
know you are not. Think you are not. No, you are not who you used to be. This belief that you used to be someone different, someone vibrant, someone happy, and the fact that you can get to a point where you actually start to question the validity of that. That's fucked up, man. It's that you no longer feel connected to your own experiences and this different version of you from the before time, whatever that was. And I might go on for a little bit at this point, but like it's ultimately very easy to end up feeling untethered and floating alone in this ether of sensory pollution, right? But I guess that we have to hope sometimes that connecting with a song is enough to help us feel connected to someone or something to pull us back. And I have to imagine that that feeling is what draws so many of us to Conor's music, and music in general. Like for those 3 to 5 minutes, you aren't alone. And I guess, in my humble opinion, like that's the ethos of Bright Eyes. Individual in the crowded universe. How do we accommodate these seemingly opposing ideas of feeling alone, yet being surrounded by and being part of a human collective? And even in 2020, Conor will never tell you how to fix that.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
and to be fair, like that's not his job. Like this music exists as comfort and catharsis both for him and us. I know I went on for a bit there, but
I 100% agree. But with everything that you said, um, and I think, like, to piggyback off of what you're saying too, it's those last lines are, yes, incredibly haunting, but also kind of a part of life. Um, and but you like waking up and realizing that you're a different person or that you're changing in some way. Like, you're going to do that throughout life. And so I think as a young person who maybe, again, I'm kind of the king of throwing out quotes and ideas and not remembering where they come from. But like this idea that like every 10 years, a person has like a sea change in personality. And it's not like something that you see like a 10-year clock goes off and it's like, I'm a new person. But it's so slow and subtle that if you like looked, if you were an avid journaler and you looked at what you were writing in a journal 10 years ago, you would be sort of questioning who this person was. And so I think for a young person who's sort of experiencing that for the first time, of realizing that they've changed in substantial ways and not coping with it, like reaching out to friends and family and seeing a, trained mental health care professional, that could lead to this sort of crisis and to go deeper into something like a chemical that covers you.
yeah, he does a really really good job of, and this is true for all of his music, but just speaking to this experience that, truth be told, I don't know is universal. What you say makes sense about changing every 10 years, but
Again, a number I just kind of threw out of nowhere from
right.
something I remembered from like undergrad or something.
Right, yeah. But I think the way Connor conveys this message in Neely O'Hara, I don't know. I think it speaks more to the substance abuse, to whatever in his life that he's probably not even sure what made him feel this way. That one day he was this relatively carefree, happy kid, and all of a sudden, like, there's this period of time where he just wasn't that anymore. So now he's trying to assimilate these competing ideas of, like, wait, was I this person and who am I now? And having to face yourself in the mirror in your drug induced or alcohol induced state has led him into questioning his identity. Who is he now? And really, and we're left off on this album on that note of, who am I? And truth be told, I have to look at Fevers and Mirrors again, but maybe that's his attempt to find that identity. I'm not sure.
I do think that this is really interesting, that this is a direct contradiction of my firm belief that Bright Eyes will always leave us on on an up note, whereas this is very much the most downer way that you could end a.
To be fair, it's an EP, right?
Right.
Versus an album. Yeah.
And so I think, like, to look at it through that lens, this is very much kind of setting up what Fevers and Mirrors is ultimately going to end up doing. And I mean, I'll throw out a little teaser here because we've said it many times, and we will continue to say it, that, oh man, we can't wait to talk about Fevers and Mirrors. Oof, the ending of Fevers and Mirrors is just, it's just
Don't
perfection.
even talk about the ending.
Yeah, I can't even do it.
You keep those words in your mouth.
I'm already dreading.
You can't breathe with these words in your mouth.
Got him.
Letting off the happiness joke.
God, I can't. I'm looking forward to all these in-jokes we get to have with all of our listeners. But I think this perfectly sets up, like, it gets you in that mind space away from letting off the happiness and into a place where you're assuming that you're following along with these releases, that you're kind of ready for the jump from happiness to Fevers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I guess, that's all I've got for Neely O'Hara. Now might be as a good a time as any to just kind of wrap up our final thoughts. I mean, I guess we've already kind of been doing that. Where have I been? But, I guess I would say, for me, like, the EP overall is one of, I think, grief and mourning. Conor mourning the person that he was, the life that he had planned out, and his struggles with finding a meaning or purpose as he feels untethered, and struggles to connect himself to others, both intentionally with the use of drugs and alcohol, or otherwise, just like kind of this natural affect that he has now, that where he's finding it hard to connect. And yeah, that was my overall reading of the EP. I will say a lot of it is tinged with recency bias because of Neely O'Hara, but I do think those themes also come across in the other 4 songs on the EP too.
Yeah, I mean, I think I didn't spend as much time talking about it as I thought I would, but like that connection between Catcher in the Rye and this EP, I could have maybe spent some more time making that a little stronger. But I will stick to the idea that we're kind of following a young man who is confused about a lot of things and seeks the refuge of chemicals, only to find that kind of makes it worse and that poses new problems. And then we end up at the end of Neely O'Hara. Oh, man, this was a interesting journey that we took together through this album.
Yeah, a wild journey indeed. And, although the album ends on a bit of a bummer, the podcast doesn't have to. We can look, Fevers and Mirrors is coming soon. I hope you're as excited to hear about it as we are to talk about it. But what the good news is, in the wait between this episode and that one, continue listening to Down in the Weeds Where the World
Yeah.
Once Was, because if you don't do that for the next couple of weeks, I heard Conor will appear in your mirror and haunt you.
And he will give you a fever that you can't sweat out.
Okay. No. Oh, no. Panic at the Disco reference.
We're doing a hard
Leave
pivot,
it in.
folks. Leave it in. This is now going to be a Brendan Urie podcast. We're going to talk all about Panic at the Disco.
So I think there's a good reason these tables are numbered, honey. You just haven't figured it out yet.
Oh, goddamn, I love that song.
It's a good song.
It's such a good song.
It's a good song. Is it Aren't? I don't know. The title is so damn long, dude.
That was so in vogue. That, like, Fall Out Boy did a bunch of those, right?
I guess we actually kind of talked about that, I think, in our first episode.
Did we?
We're calling back
to all of our viewer. Do you remember?
Do you remember that time? If you do, send us a message on at Connor's Basement. Instagram,
send us an
Twitter.
AOL instant message.
At Connor's Basement on AOL as well.
At AOL.com.
Friendster me. Check us out on LiveJournal.
I don't even know if we made a MySpace joke. Would that even track? Are they still even around?
I think technically MySpace still exists in some hollow form of its former self.
Some wraith on the internet haunting the tubes.
Oh man, yeah. Well, like you said, man, it had been a wild journey. Chris, I still don't know how to close a podcast. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and so before we close out, I think that we should let our listeners know that if you want to, I know it kind of goes without saying in 2020, but if you want to be prepared for our episode on Fevers and Mirrors, you should head over to the music streaming service of your choice and listen to Fevers and Mirrors. Give it a good listen from start to finish, and we're super psyched to dig into it with you when we cover it on our next episode.
Yeah, and I mean, even same for Every Day and Every Night. If you enjoyed us talking about it and you want to kind of have a conversation about maybe your takes and your thoughts about it, maybe give that a listen. Take a look at the lyrics, which of course are available anywhere. We'd love to hear what you guys think and maybe what you think we're wrong about, but obviously mostly what you think we're right about, because I mean, come on, we are the foremost experts, I'd say, in Conor theory. I believe.
I think so. I think we are the number one scholars. All you basement dwellers out there, figure out what our branch of study is, but just know that we're the heads of this department.
And if you want to get a certificate, an honorary degree in canology, consider joining our Patreon. It's listed on our website. I can't even get through it without laughing, man.
And if you're literally Conor Oberst listening to this, hey Conor, thanks for making it all the way to the end. I'm sure you're just sweating that we're revealing all of your secrets and breaking down your work bit by bit. But we have a several $1,000 tier that we would love you to join.
First, you get a foot in the door. You buy and then you sell and then you buy some more. But I don't know, maybe a natural way to end?
I think so. Everybody, thanks so much for coming by to the basement and listening to our rambles. On your way out, make sure just avoid the broken glass in the window. Don't cut yourself, because we can't afford the lawsuits at this point.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. We really appreciate if you've stuck around to the end. If you did and you enjoyed it, please consider rating the podcast. It helps us out quite a bit. And of course, again, consider following us on Instagram and Twitter at Connor's Basement. Lastly, again, a thank you to our patrons, Goldie, Lad, and Mom. If you want to hear your name read during the intro or credits for the episode, consider heading over to our website, connorsbasement.com, going to the Support Us page, and helping us out on our Patreon. That's all we got for today, and we hope to see you for our next episode on Fevers and Mirrors. Trust me, you're going to want to subscribe to us to hear our thoughts on that album.